Is this sectarian, or is this more about regional muscle flexing?
Well, obviously, the Saudi-Iranian rivalry, it's about geopolitics, it's about power, it's about influence. Who has basically the upper hand in the Gulf and also in the Arab East. But unfortunately and sadly and dangerously, this particular rivalry has taken on sectarian connotations between Sunni Muslims and Shiite Muslims. And this particular rivalry is playing out on Arab streets in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and Bahrain. So yes, we should be concerned because, I mean, Saudi-Iranian relations are at their lowest point. And you have the two giants in the Gulf basically waging wars by proxies in many states. So yes, it's a very dangerous and a very very volatile situation indeed.
Could it actually change that proxy war, though, into something even more serious?
This is really where, I mean, it could get very ugly. Because so far, Saudi Arabia, which is, as you know, it's the birthplace of Islam, is where the Prophet Muhammad was born. And Iran is the dominant Shia state. They have been waging wars by proxies. The question is, could this war by proxy basically escalate into a direct confrontation? If you tell me what's the most dangerous theater in the world today between Saudi Arabia and Iran, I would say Yemen. Yemen is where basically now escalation could basically, deteriorate or escalate into a direct war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But I am more concerned about really creeping sectarianism, deepening sectarianism between Shiite Islam and Sunni Islam that's really poisoning the very veins of Arab and Muslim politics. And that's why ISIS, that's why the Al-Qaeda groups have been benefiting from this particular creeping and deepening sectarianism in the Arab East in particular.
How much is this to do also with the appeasement of hardliners in both countries? I'm thinking particularly about the deal signed with the West over nuclear production in Iran, and also the fact in Saudi Arabia that there will be sympathisers of hardline groups, for example, like Islamic State.
Well, I think you're asking really a very critical question. I mean, I think Saudi Arabia now views Iran as an existential threat. Saudi Arabia believes that Iran is infiltrating and penetrating the Arab lands in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in the Gulf states, and the nuclear deal between Iran and the great powers basically unnerved Saudi leaders and Arab states, because the Saudi leaders are very anxious about Iran gaining more resources, about the fact that Iran being integrated into the great political economy, Western economy. And this would basically give Iran more sway in the Gulf and the Arab East. So in this particular sense, what we have seen in the last year is that Saudi Arabia has become much more active, much more forthcoming, much more muscular. It's directly now confronting Iran. And in fact, this particular most recent confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Iran is a direct product of the perception of the Saudi leadership that Iran is gaining basically influence in the Arab lands, and Saudi Arabia must counterbalance Iranian influence and prevent Iran from establishing hegemony in the Arab East, which is basically Saudi Arabia being the leader of the Arab world.
Briefly, I mean, you mentioned Yemen, but also we've got that proxy war, of course, taking place in Syria as well. That doesn't bode well for any sort of negotiation there, does it? But what can the international community do in terms of pressure on both these countries, who've both got either growing or strong links already with the West, for example, to try and de-escalate all of this?
What's really alarming about the escalation of this confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Iran is that there is no third party, there is no mediator that can really help Iran and Saudi Arabia bridge the divide. Basically, there are no mediators, point one. Point two, what's really alarming is not just about the wars by proxies. The international community had hoped that basically a resolution could be found for the Syrian crisis. Well, forget about it. The international community was hoping for a ceasefire in Yemen. Forget about it. And there is a space for escalation in some, because you have sizable Shiite communities in the Gulf states, and Lebanon, where I live here, where I am now, is basically extremely tense, because you have also clashes along Saudi and Iranian lines in Lebanon, being a very divided country.